Welcome everyone. Today, excited to do a longevity stream with Dr. Aubrey He's back in the studio, in the show. Back to the show today. So excited to get into that with him. Last time we had a discussion, briefly mentioned AI way before I was much more into it, much more knowledgeable than I am today. And if you haven't seen it, I did an AI kind of training series. Go to gorealdefi.com and go to Learn to Earn on the right side and click AI, very first one. And you can get access to the playlist and where I talk about AI and crypto and all that stuff too. But today it's very interesting talking about AI and longevity and just recent updates. I know there's a conference coming up with that Aubrey is doing as well. So very excited to get into it. Put all your questions in the chat. We'll get to as many as we can. Share it with anyone you think is interested in anti-aging or living longer health span, all that good stuff. But without further ado, welcome back to the show, Aubrey DeGray.
Well, thanks for having me, Max. Great to be back.
Yeah, always good to see you, man. And your beard just keeps getting longer each show. What's
That's not strictly true, but
yeah. No, it's good to see you back again. And really, I saw you at the conference, at the PulseChain conference as well, and doing the talk and all that stuff too. So really cool to see you, interact with our community and still be a part of, we're trying to accomplish this over here, but also there's so many people in our community that are really interested in longevity stuff and support you and what you're doing over there as well. So it's amazing to see you, keep, glad you're coming back on the show. I'm glad you're around Hexagons and all of us.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel the exact same way. I ever since the crypto community started to pay attention to my work, which is way back in like 2017, I have been very aware that there's a huge bedrock of interest in this. I think people in crypto, people in blockchain in general, are really natural allies to this crusade because they are first of all, they're tech people, which helps because at the end of the day this is an engineering problem, and so many of the crypto community are young, which means they haven't been ground down by failure over decades of life, and they've still got the ability to aim high. And of course, they're also comfortable with thinking out of the box, and doing things that are not necessarily accepted all that well in mainstream society. So, it's worked out that way very much. I've had enormous support from the crypto community, and long may that continue.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this recently too, just about working on hard problems or just going against the grain of people who was it Peter Thiel maybe had the famous quote. It's like it almost has to be something wrong with you, or almost like I think he quoted about Asperger's, or there has to be like something about you just makes you push beyond something else to have a good idea, and then everyone tell you it's not a good idea, or tell you that you're going to fail, or not support you, or just to keep pushing through it in order to get to the outcome or goal or whatever you want to do. Do you feel that way with longevity? Like, I mean, outside of all the people who are just not even people actively trying to discredit or actively trying to say the whole thing's just magic or it can't happen or it's not going to happen or we shouldn't worry about it. Just how do you feel personally just pushing through and trying to work on an ideal that you feel is so important, but there's just a small group of people who are like, yeah, we're with you. We want to make this thing happen too.
Well, it's relatively easy for me because yes, it's a small group of people, but it's a small and growing group, and it's been growing all the time I've been doing this. And being the person at the head, at the spearhead, I get lots of love from people who are part of this of this community. So the people I really look up to are the foot soldiers, the people who nobody comes up to them in the street and asks for their autograph, but they work every bit as hard as me. And they are every bit as committed as me, despite that. So it's those people who are, really the people to look up to. And of course, when I say foot soldiers, I don't just mean at the bench in the lab. I mean across the whole community. People doing the outreach, people doing the advocacy, people obviously writing the checks. Absolutely everybody.
Yeah, it's almost like the bar is so low to just I think the point in which I would say we joke about people being pro-death or just otherwise when they just can't believe this stuff, but it's like I think the bar is almost, for me, when I see someone who I mention the ideal to or say that I'm supportive of, or otherwise have you on stream to talk about it stuff, if their first reaction isn't you don't believe in that stuff, do you, or something like that, I think it's like, wow, maybe there's some progress, maybe a little bit at a time where we're getting in the consciousness of people to be like, hey, this thing can actually happen. We just got to work on it.
Yeah, the difference relative to 20 years ago or even 10 years ago is night and day.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I don't remember. Have there been? And we'll get into the conference and stuff too, because I think people will be interested in that. But has there been this much support or this many different factions of people working towards longevity, anti-aging, rejuvenation? Just you got Brian Johnson. You hear a lot about him on YouTube and otherwise, and different people working on it. All the people writing books and yourself included, of course. But do you feel like there is a point where if we just keep adding more and more people who just get past the idea that it is possible, and it just needs funding, and it just needs time, and it just needs people who are willing to work on it? Do you 2030, 2040, 2050, do you think it'll grow into be like, how crypto is today? Everyone thought it was 10 years ago. Some people still think it's a joke today, but there's all that stuff too. But do you think there will be a turning point where it's like, okay, wow, people are actually, they're going to start, crypto may be an election topic these days. They may swing a lot of voters there. Do you think it'll be like that with longevity one day?
I really do, yes. And actually, I mean, we'll talk about the work that's going on at LEV Foundation shortly, but it's really a large part of why we work on mice is precisely to hasten that tipping point. Because honestly, mice are quite different from humans. There will be work involved in translating anything that works in mice so that it works in humans as well. However, getting anything to work in mice, even if it won't be the same thing exactly that works in humans later on, changes people's, confidence in the whole thing. And it also changes the confidence of experts. So I, of course, have been out there for more than 20 years now, telling it like it is, saying, aging is an engineering problem, and we are, in striking distance of bringing aging under comprehensive medical control. And my colleagues haven't been doing that until pretty recently. I often, compare and contrast myself with my great friend David Sinclair, who, I mean, he and I became prominent around the same time. We've definitely been, pushing the envelope in our own ways. But I wrote a book called Ending Aging in 2007, and he didn't write a book called Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to until 2018, if I remember rightly. Now, that's not because he's more cowardly than me. It's because he had the misfortune to be a professor at Harvard. And if he'd written a book like that in 2007, he wouldn't have been a professor at Harvard for very long, because the whole thing was so totally unacceptable. Whereas now he can. And that has been happening in parallel with interest from investors. I mean, investors in the narrow sense, people who actually want to make money back in the long run. And so that's really where the explosion has happened in the past decade, especially the past, I'm going to say, 8 years, is the amount of private sector money that's been coming in, which has transformed the field, for sure. Now, that transformation has been very unevenly distributed. And certainly the work that I do, which is always focused on being the heretic in the room, doing the stuff that is still not really sufficiently understood, it's still as tough as it ever was to bring money in the door to get it done. But that's not to take away from the fact that other things that are perhaps easier, perhaps further along in the research and development path are now funded vastly better than before, which is definitely hastening the defeat of aging.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, I mean, I find it coming from a tech background and stuff. I think there's a lot of things. Maybe that's kind of how crypto became so natural to me after learning about it. I was like, oh, you can make money, and there's these cool tech things going on, decentralization. The libertarian side of me probably was pretty keen to be interested in that too. But yeah, you don't have to be crazy to think about, hey, this, as you said, as an engineering problem, as we age, there's maintenance. What can we do to reverse it? What can we do to slow it down? And all the research and papers and presentations you've done before. I remember watching, I think one of the things that had the most profound effect on me of your different events and stuff, I think, was the TED Talk you did at Google. That and maybe a similar version.
Oh, yes. I've given that I've given those talks and similar versions of them hundreds and hundreds of times. So my TED talk was actually at TED. It was in Monterey in 2006. So I've given lots and lots of TEDx talks as well. The Google talks were separate, but of course they were covering very much the same material. And I'm still doing those talks.
Yeah, exactly. And you're really good at just taking, like, presenting it to different audiences, going through again over and over and over. Like, I can't tell you, like, how it's hard to, when I'm working on something, it's like I don't want to repeat myself over and over and over. I feel like, oh, people have already heard it before. I want to talk about something different. You can only say the same words over and over and over so many times. But I really appreciate people who are working on something so so amazing that they can just be like, no, this is what it takes to get done. This is how I get it through to people, and distribute the information. And yeah, again, just having an open mind and just being like looking at it either through a tech lens, like technology lens, or looking at it through engineering lens, or just looking at it as, what are the problems in the world we're solving? Who's out there trying to solve them? And who can, either I get access to or listen to, or just, kind of scratch the itch of, like, are we making the world a better place? Like, how do we do that? Oh, here's a guy over here working on aging. Here's a guy over here working on decentralization, like whatever it is, just kind of being open to that type of stuff, I think really brings people in. And you talked about the money, resourcing, all that coming in too, that's making it easier, maybe not evenly distributed, but having a financial incentive, like getting everyone's incentives aligned to make this thing happen. I mean, money's a big part of it, right? Like, it's how, I guess, question too, like, how much does money speed things up? Or does everything just, if you had, I think I asked you a question before, if you had $10 million, $100 million, whatever it would there still be this timeline of having to, work on things over time? And we'll talk about that before we get into AI stuff too.
Yeah, well, so to come back to the first part of what you were discussing, I mean, you are right. Yeah, sometimes I have to cut to 10 a little bit and, manage my frustration when people come and make the same mistakes that they've ever made about whether aging is a bad thing at all and so on. But yeah, I guess I've got pretty good at just having patience with people and remembering that we've been in this, what I call the pro-aging trance, for millennia, ever since civilization began, if not earlier. And it's not supposed to be easy to shake such a thing when it's that deep-seated. As regards to the difference money makes, well, of course, there is a point of diminishing returns where you're not just going to speed everything up linearly. But certainly, at least in the pre-investable subset of what needs to be done, the stuff that I tend to focus on, it's, yeah, we're definitely not at diminishing returns. We could definitely speed things up quite a bit with even a few tens of millions of dollars. And so when I see the kind of money that's being thrown around in the private sector, and to some extent outside the private sector, so Hevolution is, of course, a great example of this, it's a bit difficult to take.
Yeah, is it just, what ideas do you find get the most funding? Is it something that is like a short-term investing type of thing where I don't want to invest in it, it's going to take 100 years to pay off? Or is it more of like this thing, is it just like tangible results type of thing, or people that want to bet on long-term stuff? What do you think investors are looking for?
It is pretty much exactly that, short-termism. Anyone who wants to make money wants to make it tomorrow. And of course, they also know that if they bet long-term, then it's more of a bet. There's more chances for the whole thing not to work out. And some people are happy to address that problem by diversification, just by taking a lot of shots on goal, and knowing that some of them are going to work out, even if most of them don't. But actually, the worst of it is that there's also a vast amount of short-termism in academia, arising from a completely different source, namely the funding structure. The fact that everything is funded through peer review, through other scientists evaluating each other's proposals for what they're going to spend money on. And that's almost the opposite of science. In science, you're supposed to be having new ideas that are radical enough that your colleagues won't really understand them at first, even if you try and explain them well. And so, peer review is a peer review of grant applications is an absolute travesty. It really is. It shouldn't be allowed. Peer review of manuscripts of actual publications after you've done the work, that's a different matter. And well, that's got its own problems, but those problems are much less bad. So in academia, you've also got this enormous short-termism, because the way that people get evaluated is on their track record, which basically means you've got to get a nice steady stream of publications in high-profile journals that only take fashionable things. And so you end up again with the importance of a particular body of work, of a research direction, taking second place to how fashionable it is, which is like, it's why I made the decision 20 odd years ago to create an independent organization that was non-profit and got all its money from philanthropy rather than from government grants. And it's worked out, obviously. I've been able to make substantial progress with the teams that I've been able to assemble. But there's a long way to go.
And do you see, we kind of touched on it earlier, I wanted to get into it too, because I've been fascinated with AI in the last few months, and coming from the tech background again, I'm just like, wow, this is, I feel 10x more productive in certain areas. I can even do with media stuff, with, even with streaming and otherwise, is so much, I can do things much faster, much easier. And the coding aspect is, just game changer. I've been using it as, basically as a pair programmer to work on, different websites or tools or whatever it is. Its ability to become mainstream. And you got OpenAI, you got the whole, everyone's like, oh, AI, it's a buzzword and all this stuff. To me, it's like, wow, this is one of the few true things that has been just this amazing invention, technology, and the capital coming together to make it happen. There's downsides and upsides too, but just on the upside part for longevity, has it, the past 6 months, year, whenever, has it changed or, what we all hope, sped things up in terms of research and progress in that area?
So this is a really complicated question, and I guess we're probably going to spend quite a bit of time on it in the next few minutes. So initially, what we saw when companies started coming along, like in silico medicine and BioAge, that were doing that were applying state-of-the-art machine learning to drug discovery, it was kind of easy to understand what was going on. These were, really smart systems that could identify patterns that humans can't identify, and indeed made real progress. And sure enough, those companies are now basically unicorns because it worked. So that's great. But it's only great up to a point, because it's really restricted at that level to pharmacology, to the development of drugs. It's much more difficult to use AI for developing new types of, for example, cell therapy or even gene therapy. And, that will change, but it's not obvious how or how soon it will change. And I'm not talking here about the inherent limitations of large language models with, what's it called, hallucination and things like that, which are, pretty inherent. But I'm not really fussed about that, because we know that the technology underlying large language models can be combined with other machine learning technologies, to achieve really interesting results. Like AlphaFold, which I think still definitely takes the title of the most important contribution of AI to biomedical research yet. This program that finds the three-dimensional structure of a protein from its amino acid sequence. That program, to my understanding anyway, is not based on the same technology that large language models are at all, really. So there's plenty of, mixing and matching and synergizing to do within the AI world. And so I think, as time goes on, we're definitely going to see more and more progress driven by machine learning of one sort or another, which is great. But there's one really big caveat that I want to give, which has really only cropped up in the past year or so. And that is that some of the people who were originally betting strongly on the ability of biotechnology to crack the aging problem in the foreseeable future have shifted their emphasis substantially, if not totally, to thinking, well, okay, AI is moving so fast, it's going to be the route one. It's going to be the quickest way to solve the aging problem. And there's no point in putting money into wet stuff anymore, into boring bench work, because, you know, it just won't be, it'll be outrun by what we can do in silica. That is, to my mind, deeply oversimplistic for two reasons. One, which I think is really an obvious reason, is that machine learning has to start from something. If we're dealing with trying to manipulate a system in the real world, in the physical world, like, for example, the human body, then we've got to know a lot about the human body in order to do that. And there are some things that we can gather very large amounts of information about today with today's technology, like the epigenome or other omic technology, right? That's great. That's definitely better than nothing. But there's a very great deal that we can't do with existing technology, and that needs more bench work to inform it, so that AI can pick up the next part. The other part is, of course, as with any pioneering technology, you don't know what you don't know. The time frame for any particular approach actually working is dominated by the unknown unknowns. And therefore, the sensible thing to do, without question, is to carry on pushing multiple different avenues forward in parallel, so as to give the best chance that one or other of them will succeed as soon as possible.
Do you think there, just to your point too of the silicon versus I don't know, it's hard for me to frame this, but when you're saying that, I was thinking, like, do you think that it would help to have not only the computer side, not only like working on faster model or like bigger models and the AI side of that, the software side, but some kind of combination? I don't know if that'll be like robotics or otherwise that can, I'm just in my head, I'm just kind of imagining like, oh, there's a robot that's, taking samples from a lab, like actual, like physical material, like liquids and stuff, and then feeding it to a computer to do the stuff that would be manually done before. But now you have a robot that can be doing it much faster, 24/7 at a time. Do you think those kinds of advancements is something we'll see?
Yes, I certainly do. The problem here, though, is that there is an enormous spectrum within biotechnology of, automatability, call it. So there are some things we have to do in molecular biology and cell biology that are extremely mechanical. And we've had robots to do those things for a long time. You don't need AI for it. You can just program them. Now, AI definitely helps. It expands the range of things that can be automated in a manner that doesn't have, trade-offs. But there are still masses of things that absolutely can't be automated, where you need the human interaction. Especially things like, when you need to inject this or that thing into a mouse. Mice are alive, and you better do it right. And even though there has been significant progress in improving what can be done, I believe that we're still quite a few years away from being able to dispense with human oversight and human implementation of all laboratory work.
Do you think it will turn into something where you kind of just, the humans are giving the instructions, kind of managing, looking at the results from time to time, but everything else, the mechanical side, there'll be labs where you'll be at home and just kind of like getting fed alerts from things happening, and then at the lab, the robots, the AI, like all that side of it, all the experimentation outside of like maybe actually handling animals, maybe won't be there for a long time to do that safely and all that. But will that be kind of the future of, scientists, people working on this type of stuff? It'll be more of, the AI will be this just super assistant type of deal. And that will, I guess, can you see that being helpful? But then also, is that part even, is there a lot of ROI in doing that?
There's massive ROI in doing it. And as I say, you don't even need to go as far as artificial intelligence for this. In the pre-AI days, we already had robots to do a substantial amount of the most mechanical aspects of molecular biology. And you could just program them, and yes, it would be exactly as you just said. One would set the thing off, and one will come in the next morning and look at the results. So that's still going to be true for those aspects of biomedical research that we could not automate before, but that we can automate now because of AI, right? So really, yes, nothing's going to change in that regard. The only problem is that it will be, I think, quite a long time before we can automate everything in the lab, to the extent that we have been able to automate some things already.
Are there any companies or projects or otherwise you've seen that specialize in AI that are trying to solve problems such as longevity, or even came to you and said, "Hey, we've got this tech, we're working on this thing, we think it'll help speed things up"? Has there been any like industry conversations like that?
Sure, totally. So I already mentioned a couple of companies. I mentioned those two, in silico medicine and BioAge, simply because they have been the ones that have succeeded the most commercially so far. They're both in the billion-dollar valuation range. But there are plenty of others that are a lot smaller, but are showing great value, and there will be more and more, including for lab automation, as you just mentioned. There's one that has been in the news quite a bit over the past short while because they kind of came out of stealth not long ago. It's called Olden Labs, and they're trying to automate as much of mouse lab work as possible, and that absolutely applies to mouse longevity work.
Why do you think big pharma in general, all the top companies, all the ones that have been making drugs and everything for the last, even the labs, all that stuff, what is keeping, I kind of think of like in big tech, you've got all the big companies that are working on these problems, trying to scale stuff, but they're not quite as, you could say as you get bigger, the innovation goes down, or you start working on just dividends or just investor, like that type of stuff. Why do you, and correct me if I'm wrong, why do you think the bigger companies aren't just jumping on, hey, if we can sell people a pill or a therapy or otherwise to make them live longer, what price are they not going to pay for that type of thing? Why wouldn't that be profitable, forever type of thing?
So there's a couple of reasons. The first reason is, at the moment, that doesn't really fit the business model of big pharma. At the moment, big pharma makes its money out of keeping sick people alive without making them healthy again. And there's a perception that it would make much less money by keeping people healthy without letting them get sick in the first place. Now, that perception has some truth to it, but the reason it has some truth to it is one that is very often overlooked. The reason it has truth to it is not because these medicines will be, less expensive or less profitable or anything like that. They'll be abundantly profitable because people don't want to get sick. The issue is another thing that people don't want, which is to get sick as a result of medicines. And there is a huge psychological barrier in people's minds that says that, well, medicines, especially new medicines, are fundamentally, black magic. They might or might not work. And therefore, if one's not yet sick, then one can, when the only way is down, kind of thing. They might not make you sick, but they might, and they won't make you healthy because you already are. And so, the actual selling point, namely that they will not only keep you healthy, they'll keep you healthy for longer than you would otherwise be, that is kind of overshadowed by the more knee-jerk risks in society. So everyone, they say, oh, big pharma are evil, or they'll say the FDA is evil. They're just trying to keep good medicines away from people by taking far too long to approve things, or making the whole regulatory process so expensive that new companies can't muscle in, things like that. Those things are not really true. Those things are, but perhaps one could argue that they're partly true. But mostly the FDA is just enacting the law, and the law is what it is because the public like it that way, and the people who make the law like to get reelected. So, we've got to change society's attitude to preventative medicine in general, which certainly means longevity medicine. And it's, very hard, but that's what we've got to focus on.
Okay. One more on AI before you go, because there's a few questions here too. Has there anything that you've seen so far that would change your estimations or otherwise to make you think we would have therapies and trials and just again progress in the field, knowing what you know about AI today and perhaps its progression. If hopefully we are on that, for better terms, we are on that exponential curve. Hopefully that will lead to a lot of progress. Has anything changed as far as that goes for you?
So nothing has happened to change my estimate of the expected time frame. The time when I think we have a 50-50 chance of getting there. I think between in 12 to 15 years is where I'm saying these days we have a 50-50 chance of getting to longevity escape velocity. But what has changed in my mind is the variance. If you'd asked me, what is my time frame for having a 90% chance of reaching longevity escape velocity, I used to say at least 100 years, and I still do. But if we ask the other end, what is my estimate of the time frame that we have a 10% chance of reaching longevity escape velocity, then previously I would have said only a couple of years sooner than my 50% estimate. And now I don't know what to say. It could be a couple of years from now. And the reason I have raised my level of uncertainty at the optimistic end of the distribution is because of things like AlphaFold. I mean, honestly, AlphaFold came completely out of the blue. People had been trying to solve the protein folding problem computationally for decades, and the progress was very, very nearly zero. And then AlphaFold came along maybe 6 years ago, and it won this competition that happens every 2 years. But it only won it by a little bit. It did not seem to be, all that important. And we knew that, DeepMind are a smart company. But then 2 years later, just the next time they ran the competition, AlphaFold had basically solved the entire problem. I mean, not completely. There were things it couldn't do with, proteins bound to cofactors or, proteins bound to each other and so on. But it was just ridiculously good in just 2 years. And 2 years after that, so a year or two ago, when the next competition happened, they didn't even compete, which was a great disappointment to me and I'm sure to many, many other people, because you can bet your life it's a hell of a lot better now than it was before. It was 2 years earlier. So yeah, I mean, out of the blue. And so when I say that I believe we desperately need more bench data to inform AI in order to allow it to come to its full potential in terms of developing things that really do bring aging under medical control, that's, again, a probabilistic statement. It could just be that we've already got enough data, or that we will have enough data within the next year without doing anything new, right? But I wouldn't put the probability of that scenario above 10 or 15%, which means that most of my money, if I were the billionaire in question, most of my money would still go on the benchwork.
Wow, very interesting. So are the things that make the biggest difference that, if your wish list of things go up, AI becomes much more useful for, these types of the work you're doing. Society becomes more accepting or otherwise, can speed up the progress of trying new things and not thinking they're going to get sicker from them, or just embracing the idea that these things can be helpful and are worth pursuing and all that stuff, and or governments, society and or governments. And then the funding of such to do the research, like increasing. Are those the three major things that you think would help progress in the area?
Yes, they are, with specifically, an emphasis on the diversity of that funding, on ensuring that nothing gets neglected just because it's not going to make you money.
How do you, let's say that, there was, large, all the, that started happening, a lot more funding started coming in, people were evaluating where to put it. Is it just I guess the things that you think are hard to get funded, is it just the short-termism type of thing where they'll take a long time to take off and you can't really make a better case for them? other than it takes a long time? Like, how do you compete with the other ideas?
Well, okay, so perhaps the best answer is that the things that are so early that they are pre-investable, or that are pre-investable, that are investable for other reasons, like we can get on to what we're doing at LEV Foundation with combination interventions. Those things, your incentive to write a check arises from basically trust. You have to basically say, okay, there's this guy asking for money. Do I trust that he's knowledgeable enough and has that he's selfless enough, not trying to make a quick buck for himself, that he's, got the integrity to do this. And so, there's no shortcuts there. I mean, the reason that I've brought in very much more philanthropic funding into the longevity crusade than anybody else in the world is because I've been around a very long time, saying the same thing, being right, having my ideas increasingly accepted, and also because I've shown that I'm not in this for money. Early on, when I was just becoming known, it was very important for me to look the way I do, because I had to distance myself from what was then called the anti-aging industry, essentially an industry based on selling things that don't work to people who have no sense. And the best way to do that was to make sure that if you look at me, then you can't look at me for more than 10 seconds and still believe that I might be in this for personal financial gain. I mean, I already looked like this. Let me be clear. I didn't grow this beard for that purpose. But
it reminds me of Richard Hart popularizing you gotta break through the noise, he says.
Well, that's right. And so, but you've got to do it over and over again. There's no substitute for repeat advertising. So the fact that I've been doing it for 20 or more years is what has gained me the trust of donors, including obviously the Hexagon community from 2021. And everything I do is geared towards, strengthening that trust, so that people will keep on writing the checks, because ultimately the work's not going to get done otherwise, and lives are going to be lost.
Hear that, everyone? Go make a lot of money and then go fund the best ideas that you think are in the world. And if you're looking for good ideas, there's a few people that we keep interviewing in the community that are working on some cool stuff.
LEVF.org/donate.
Yeah, actually, let me put that in the chat real quick. I think I tagged on Twitter as well. So if you look on Twitter, anyone watching from there, you can see in the tweet the account there should be tagged, as well as Aubrey. Few questions in the chat. I'm going to get to a couple here too. Can we ask Aubrey if he's aware of Alan Goldhammer's work on the True North Health Center versus age 40,000 people with fasting and vegetable diets?
Yeah, okay. So first of all, no, I'm not aware of that work, but I can immediately see from the rest of the question why I'm not aware of it. Namely that, yes, there are some diseases, notably type 2 diabetes, that can be very substantially reversed already with existing technology. And the kind of technology that the questioner is describing is kind of, I do not come in with enormous skepticism with regard to this result. It sounds like the kind of thing that could certainly have happened. But that's the problem. In fact, it's such a problem that I have tended to steer away from including type 2 diabetes as a disease of aging, along with, Alzheimer's and cancer and atherosclerosis and so on, because it's off the scale in terms of how easy it is to reverse it. Everything else in aging, we need substantial progress relative to anything that can be done today in the clinic. And without that progress, we're going to make only very, very mild, slight inroads into how old people can get before they get sick.
Crypto Shilling says, "When singularity?" Any thoughts? If you have any on singularity?
Well, first of all, when I started getting known, Eliezer Yudkowsky was already quite well known and was being interviewed everywhere in terms of like the possibility of a hard takeoff, and the idea that we needed to create safe AI that had these invariants. Honestly, I've always felt, and this is a gut feeling because one can't really know, that a hard takeoff is just never going to happen. It's just kind of like it requires, well, to put it in computing terms, it requires too much I/O. And so, you know, AIs are never going to be that autonomous to be able to, you know, understand themselves well enough to improve themselves and so on. But of course, the singularity can be defined in other ways, in terms of, for example, simply regular AI that has not become, you know, infinitely self-improving, nevertheless becoming sufficiently smarter than us that we don't know what it's going to do next. You know, that would be enough for some people to say that's the singularity. And so, you know, keeping AI under control, you know, it's no accident that large numbers of the experts in this field are spending a lot of their time on AI safety, which means, of course, that the singularity might not be very far off at all. But the question kind of gives me the opportunity to mention another thing called the Methuselarity, which is the point at which we reach longevity escape velocity. I'm rather fond of my own terminology in these things, but actually I cannot take credit for that word. It was invented by a friend of mine, Paul Hynek. But it's an excellent word. And there are quite a lot of differences between the singularity and the Methuselarity. In particular, the key thing about the Methuselarity is that we don't need accelerating progress to get to it or to stay or to maintain it. And you know, I've written about this in other places, so one can look up what I've written comparing the singularity with the Methuselarity, but it's an interesting comparison.
Gotcha. Fox Water, what's the single greatest thing we can do to extend personal longevity that isn't taking nutritional supplement or something obvious like exercising, not smoking, etc.?
Yeah, I've been giving the same answer to this question for at least 20 years. And it's, of course, it's not an answer that anyone really wants to hear. The answer is, write me a large check. Because the fact is, you know, there's nothing else that can make a difference right now. Especially if you're younger, the only thing you can really do is, you know, wear a seatbelt in the back seat. You know, I always say, you know, one thing I do is I don't accept seminar invitations to dangerous countries. But the fact is, by far the most important thing to do to extend your personal longevity is to hasten the progress in developing things that do not yet exist.
Gotcha. Let's see. We got Crypto Shilling. Is minting stem cell from DNA possible for longevity and cures?
Gosh, I have never heard the word minting used in that particular way. But insofar as I can understand what the questioner means, the answer is no, it's not possible. A cell consists of a very great deal more than the DNA. You have to have, you know, a lot of lipids and proteins or arranged in an interesting way, in an appropriate way. And cells do not start from scratch. Even the fertilized egg is not starting from scratch. It's got a whole lot of stuff brought into it from the two gametes, from the egg and the sperm, that are the starting point, without which the DNA could not run, so to speak. It could not be the program. So no, that's definitely not possible. And even if it were, it wouldn't be the right way to address medical problems. In the same way that, for example, there's this thing called partial reprogramming that people are very interested in these days. It's very exciting. It involves essentially applying to the body the same kind of, well, pressure, if you like, genetic pressure, that happens in the fertilized egg in order to turn these two very different types of cell, the unfertilized egg and the sperm, into halves of the genome that then develops to create the whole body. That's a process driven by these things called the Yamanaka factors. And sure enough, if you do it in vivo in the body, then cells become more stem-like, a bit more like an early cell in the body. But of course, you don't want to go too far. We don't want our brains to turn into protoplasm. We want only a little bit of this, and so it's still unclear whether there is a happy medium there that gives us more regenerative capacity by virtue of having more stemness, if you like, without doing harm at the same time. There are other approaches out there that involve using factors other than the Yamanaka factors, which may have a better chance of hitting, giving the benefits without the deficits. But it's too early to say.
Wow. Very cool. Stargate, don't we have a solution like living longer already? It has something to do with telomere chromosome, something like that?
No. So back in 1961, a wonderful man, great friend named Len Hayflick made an important discovery, which was that if you tried to make cells grow, indefinitely, you couldn't. They would eventually stop growing. They would eventually stop dividing. And a decade or so later, people started to figure out what was going on. It turns out to be down to something called the end replication problem, which is what the questioner is referring to. The telomeres, the ends of the chromosomes, get shorter when cells divide, and eventually they get so short that the cell goes into a state called senescence, where it doesn't divide anymore. Now, that's all very well, but it really shouldn't have been called senescence, because senescence is a highfalutin word for aging, and you're kind of implying, without stating, and certainly without justifying, that this is something that happens in the body, opposed to in the petri dish, which is where Hayflick discovered it. And it turns out that it's not nearly as simple as that. The cells that Hayflick used, and the cells that indeed nearly everybody uses when you're studying this phenomenon, are cells taken from the lower layer of the skin, what's called the dermis, and they're called fibroblasts. Now, the upper layer of the skin, the epidermis, is continually turning over. We have stem cells at the bottom on the basal lamina that divide every so often and replace the skin that's coming off, the dead skin that's coming off slowly over time. But the dermis doesn't do that. And that's a really important difference, because it turns out that if you try to do the same thing with the epidermis, you don't get the same result, because the stem cells of the epidermis express an enzyme called telomerase, which is an enzyme that counteracts this shortening of the telomere that happens during cell division. Now, they only express a teeny tiny amount of telomerase, but that's okay, because the stem cells of the epidermis only divide every few months. Now, it turns out that fibroblasts, by and large, don't divide at all. They just hang out. But they do divide like crazy when they're in a wound. If you have a cut or something, then the cut needs to be closed, to stop bleeding and to stop infections getting in. And some of that is done by cells in the blood, and some of it's done by cells that are not in the blood, these things called fibroblasts. All right, fine so far. But what that means is that if you take cells and you put them into a petri dish and you ask them to divide, and these are fibroblasts, then they will divide. They'll be very good at it. They'll divide like crazy, because that's what they do in a wound. But because you keep diluting them away, they will never close the wound. They will never get the signals, which is called contact inhibition, that tells them to stop dividing. And since that never happens in the body, sure enough, they get in trouble. But it's a completely non-physiological phenomenon. And the same is true across the whole rest of the body. There's really only one system in the body where this phenomenon called replicative senescence probably plays some role, and that's the immune system. And even there, it's a bit questionable, because the immune system also turns on this enzyme telomerase sometimes. So yeah, it's complicated. But the answer is that, this whole idea that telomere shortening somehow controls aging, and therefore telomere lengthening by medicine would somehow make us immortal, that's a very gross oversimplification.
Gotcha. Thank you for the explanation. Wow. One last question. Sorry, I can't get to all of them in the chat, but just wanted to get this because it may be interesting. From Drix, do you anticipate any unintended happy side effects in the quest to longevity?
Well, I wouldn't call the happy side effects unintended. A lot of money would certainly donate to prevent baldness and dental cavities. People are getting better at that. But the therapies are still quite expensive, essentially because there's perhaps not enough money in the enough people willing to write checks to address these things. There's not enough customer pressure to improve the cost effectiveness of these things. Perhaps that's because if you're going bald, well, you're not far. You're depending on your propensity to go bald, of course. You may not be very many years away from getting rather more debilitating aspects of aging, like heart disease. And so, the benefits of not going bald may not really translate into being willing to spend all that much money. Dental cavities is another interesting one. Of course, teeth. The people who are most at risk of dental cavities are, you do most of the damage early in life if you haven't used enough fluoride in your toothpaste, things like that. But actually, there is, again, plenty of progress on that. And in fact, just recently, a company launched in Prospera. I'll talk about Prospera in a moment, which seems to have a very effective way of preventing dental cavities. So since the questioner is talking about donating or perhaps even investing in this case, because as I say, this is a company, let me talk about Prospera. Prospera is a special economic zone in Honduras, or more precisely, in an island off Honduras that belongs to Honduras. And because it's a special economic zone, it has very broad legal autonomy, including autonomy over medical regulatory matters. And it has made very sure to capitalize on that. I've been there a couple of times over the past few months, and I think they're doing unbelievable, amazing things. And I think that they're within a couple of years probably of becoming the global hub of medical tourism, because the freedom that they have to streamline the regulatory process when compared to places like the US is just breathtaking. And it's working. There are companies incorporating there, relocating there, hand over fist. It's growing fast, and the only way is up, really. This is, I believe, a large part of how we will crack the pro-aging trance. It's by FOMO, by getting governments and their agencies like the FDA to modernize or die, because or have economic problems as a result because of competition from other jurisdictions. And new jurisdictions like this one, like Prospera, to my mind, have the best chance right now.
Wow. Okay. I want to talk about the conference you got coming up too. Can you tell us about that? And is it Longevity Dublin? Does one come up soon?
That is right. Longevity Summit Dublin. This will be the third one. Started it two years ago. It was I was able to announce the launch of my new foundation, LEV Foundation, then, because I've been able to extract a sufficient amount of money. I talked about that at the PulseChain conference, so I won't talk about it again. But the thing is, it was, a fantastic success, as all my conferences have ever been since 2003 when I started them in Cambridge. We have spectacular speakers. We also have a lot of speakers that other experts and indeed other people in the field might not have heard of yet, because I make it my business to keep my eyes open to identify things that are going to be important in years to come, but you heard it here first, kind of thing. And of course, there's a lot of people who are not necessarily career scientists, but who are deeply interested in the longevity crusade and who are participating in other ways, such as in advocacy and so on. You'll see plenty of that on the program as well. The advocacy side of things took a particularly high profile last year as well, because last year at the conference, we launched a declaration from hundreds of experts in the field, which, because it was launched there, was called the Dublin Longevity Declaration. And it's basically, by some distance, the most aggressive, optimistic statement from the expert community that's ever happened with regard to the likely time frame for really good progress in bringing aging under medical control. It's not as gung-ho as I tend to be, but it's a very big step forward from what people have been saying in the past. And the fact that so many experts, including people with a lot to lose, people with a strong track record of relative conservatism, signed up to it, that really matters. So, of course, now the next step is to get not just experts, but the general public signed up. We only have a couple of thousand signatures at the moment, and I want a couple of 100,000. So get signing. It's on our website, of course. You can go and sign, add your signature anytime.
Got a 10x, 20x, 100x those signatures. Yeah. Another question here that just made me think, Mr. Chuck, best diet for longevity. Also want to just the ideal that, do you think there'll be like food in general? Do you think once we have, progress in this field and therapies and stuff like that, will it come with a diet, or will we be making, like synthetic type of superfoods that will kind of like go hand in hand with the therapies? How do you think about like that kind of thing?
Yeah, no. So, because the therapies that I work to develop are bona fide rejuvenation therapies that actually repair molecular and cellular damage that has already been laid down by our metabolism, that means that you can get away with having the body lay down that damage in the first place a bit more rapidly than it might if you were eating really well, or whatever. People would actually ask me this question and say, well, will it be okay for me to eat a bad diet from now on? And I'm not saying it'll be okay if you eat a really bad diet, like really short of micronutrients and everything, but it probably will be okay to be a bit less careful than you might want to be today. And so, far from there being a dietary component that is kind of a requirement to keep you young as you get chronologically old, the opposite will happen. There will be more flexibility in what you have to eat.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know. I was just thinking like, okay, you're on these therapies and, hopefully they'll be able to give you 10, 20, 30 years. Like we'll see, we'll track the progress. Also, you can, maybe we estimate 20% more if you stick to this particular diet or eat these particular foods. You don't think there'll be any kind of like, or do you think that'll be just so marginal that it's not kind of like a big part of the therapies?
Yeah, I think it's definitely marginal. I don't think it'll be a big part.
Gotcha. Well, how can, man, there's so much here as far as, I'm so excited for the future. And again, everyone watching it, if you're not interested in longevity, or you're skeptic, or I always ask myself these questions of like, what's the benefit? What's the benefit of, not supporting stuff like this? What is the benefit of not just trying to, work on these big problems or support people working on big, you don't have to work on big problems yourself, but like, well, why would I not support, people working on solving these big problems in the world, and not even be a detractor, but just being neutral and that kind of thing? Is it just not like, is everyone just too busy? Is it always like one of those things like, I'm too busy to get in good shape, I'm too busy to think about like, there's nothing I can do to solve it? Is that kind of thing?
Well, a lot of it is the last of those. So when I talk about the pro-aging trance, there's irrationality that virtually everybody has about aging. And when I say virtually everybody, there's a lot more rational people now, but it's still a small minority, right? It comes in two flavors. One flavor is, convincing oneself that aging is some kind of blessing in disguise, and that death gives meaning to life and other nonsense like that. And the other is that aging is somehow woven into the fabric of the universe in some manner that diseases are not, and that therefore it's all completely quixotic trying to do something about it. And we shouldn't even try, and we certainly shouldn't spend our own money down the drain when the chance of it making any impact is nil. So, of course, I'm out there demystifying aging all the time, explaining that aging is no different really than aging of a car, and we've got vintage cars, same deal. But, it's hard to convince people of that. And people don't like, especially, to be laughed at by people they care about. I've had people over the years who've given me major amounts of money and then stopped doing so because their wives told them not to. Or not giving me any money at all because their wives told them not to. And that's a huge problem. It's true of billionaires not wanting to be laughed at by their fellow billionaires. It's like it's human nature, and I try to be charitable about it, but honestly, it's delaying the defeat of a problem that kills 110,000 people a day, along with a vast amount of suffering. So, you know, I just want people to be more rational about it, and to, you know, to think about it the exact way that you just described. No, is it really, you know, are you really sure that this is so impossible that it's not worth putting a bit of money into trying to make it happen sooner rather than later?
Yeah, and it's not like, I mean, you could just do it. To me, too, it's not like my life goal is longevity. It isn't today. Who knows in the future? But it's just, you know, there's people dedicating. It's almost like a respect for people going out there trying to do these things that seem impossible or otherwise. And it's not like you gotta mortgage your house and like spend all your money. It's like you don't have to go broke, or you don't have to tell anyone about it. I mean, donations can be, whatever too. It's not like you gotta, all your donations you gotta tell your friends about all the time. So there's ways to do it where you're not detracting. And I don't know, like I said, there's this it's just one of those, what was the benefit in being like, no, we shouldn't do that. We should never do that. That's a bad idea. What is the likelihood in the future that's going to turn out to be correct? Like, I don't know.
But this is why I call it a trance, right? You know, I got that name, the pro-aging trance, when I started having conversations with people about aging, and I was just completely blown away by how people who would be completely rational about absolutely every other topic would say things that would embarrass a child, you know, when it came to this topic. And I realized that I had one memory, one experience in my prior life that it reminded me of, which was a stage hypnosis show where somebody was told something that wasn't true, was made to believe very, very implicitly something that wasn't true, and then essentially was asked to explain this or that thing. And it was like the explanations would be utterly ridiculous, but the subject, who was in a trance, would not have the faintest problem saying these things, even though he could see his friends laughing and rolling in the aisles laughing, you know. Yeah, it's like that.
Amazing. Well, Aubrey, we really appreciate you. I don't know if you get enough thanks and enough praise and enough just glad that you're around. And again, I always appreciate you coming on and talk to us about the latest stuff.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me again. I'll be happy to come back anytime.
Awesome. Where can, before we go, LEVF.org, get the Longevity Summit Dublin.com, the declaration, we talked about that. Is there anything else people should know about being able to donate or contribute or otherwise?
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's a nice friendly donate button right there on the page. You can obviously donate in crypto and so on. One thing we didn't get to is the flagship research project that we're doing, but there's masses of that on the website, masses about it. The design of the project, progress, interim updates on how it's doing, which is really, really impressive. I'm really happy about how it's going. And also there's a description of the sequel, the next project that we want to do. These are very expensive projects, but I believe that they are the best value for money in terms of, like, information gained for $1 spent of anything that's going on in the entire longevity world right now. So the second project is described on the website, and I'm trying my very best to raise the $3.5 million that it's going to take to kick it off.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll have the maddest of gains, and all the crypto guys guys and girls that are a fan of your work will be able to help out there. Certainly, I don't know. There's a list of things to work on in the world. Again, this is one of the important things that I think of, at least, and that's why, of course, we have these conversations. And I'm not alone. There's so many people, again, watching today that have watched before. Richard himself, of course, that want to see success in this area. So, again, thank you for coming on. Always good to have you, Aubrey.
Thank you. And Richard, if you're listening, come and say hello. We haven't chatted for a long time.
Yes. Awesome. Shout out to Richard Harder. All right. That's all we got for you today. Scivive and 5555. We are out.